where it's a bigger problem is non-owner occupied. So your investors, because there's not really much of a cap on what they can do to you guys right now. Well, the biggest one hasn't changed in a long time, and it's having horrible contracts. You know, some of the contracts I see, like anytime you see something that says standard purchase agreement and it's 2 pages long, you got that online or something, or you got it from some guy you overpaid at a seminar, and it's a piece of junk.
You are now listening to the Real Estate Heavyweights Podcast.
You see this guy here staring back at you? That's your toughest opponent. Every time you get into the ring, that's who you're going against. I believe that in boxing, and I do believe that in life.
Your weekly deep dive into DFW real estate, life, and beyond. With your hosts, Tavis Westbrook and Ashton Hines.
Well, good morning and welcome to the Real Estate Heavyweights Podcast. I am your co-host, Tavis Westbrook. Ashton is actually on band duty and he's out of town. So I am the heavier side of the heavyweight duo here. And today we've got a special guest for you, a good friend of mine and counsel as well, Mr. Matt Aycock. And I wanted to let him kind of tell you a little bit about himself, but welcome to the show, Matt.
Hey, thanks, Tavis. Appreciate you guys having us.
Awesome. So, Matt, you and I crossed paths many years ago. I forget exactly how long you've kind of been in the DFW, real estate side of things here. And, I first met you, I think our cross paths just when you were in the title business. Right. And I know that, a lot of people talk about you. I've heard your name many years, in the real estate investment side of things here in Dallas and DFW. But why don't you give us a little bit of your background, kind of just your quick intro, kind of where you started, kind of what your path has included and where you're at today.
Yeah. So, out of undergrad, I was a programmer. I mean, that's kind of what my goal was. And, the .com collapse happened literally the year I graduated. So all those jobs evaporated. And, obviously in 2000, that's when subprime was really starting to move quickly. And a lot of people were jumping into subprime, and the title company was hiring and they just needed people that could type really, really fast. And so being a programmer, obviously I could do that. So I had a pulse and everything. So they're like, hey, come on, And so I kind of started really enjoying the business. And while I was working as a title examiner, I decided to go into law. And so I started going to law in the evening and working during the day, and ended up at Bank of America handling Land Safe National Default, which is their title agency, and developed a lot of great connections, met a lot of really good people. Around 2010, first part of 2010 is when I went out on my own, started my own practice. And that would have been when we would have met, Tavis, because that's when we were in that mega building, the Dallas Preston Road office of KW. Yeah. For whatever reason, you had all of us, young guys coming in there, and we all ended up doing really well. So we kind of got to grow up together, which was really nice, and still remain friends with most all of y'all. So that's how we met. And then I exited the title business in early 2000. I've been just focused on my law practice ever since. I'm licensed in Texas and in Florida as an attorney, and primarily deal with real estate investors, lenders, funds, things of that nature. But anything real estate we can handle. But those are my typical clients are going to be those types. Recently started kind of an alternative loan origination and servicing company, which I announced yesterday. So that's
congratulations.
That's pretty exciting as well. We're looking forward to blowing that up next year. So
what's the name of it?
Yeah, that was called Fort Loan Services.
And what's what was the bridge that you were bridging the gap with putting that together, Matt?
Yeah, so with Fort Loan, we noticed that one of the things that I've always done to make money is I listen to people complain and I make note of it. And when I start hearing the same complaints over and over again, I attempt to buy, create a product or service that fixes that problem. I don't just go out and create something, and I don't really like dealing with more of a commodity approach to business. I try to figure out what is everybody consistently complaining about. And then I try to find out, is there anything out there in the market that fixes that? And if there's not, I create it. My first thing I did like this in the real estate business was short sales. I don't know if you remember, but I negotiated a ton of short sales for people, and in conjunction with handling the title work, because I knew how to work the banking side and get paid more. So with this, what I'm looking at is we've got, higher rates. And while I do believe we'll see a dip next year, I think it's probably going to be temporary. And so we're going to be in a market where we've got a lot of products out there with lower rates, but current rates are going to be too high for people to buy. And so one of the products we offer is either subject to a wraparound servicing and origination, because one of the biggest problems in that space right now that we hear the most complaints about is the buyer's paying, but the seller's not paying the mortgage. And then you get foreclosed on those. And so we want to eliminate that concern. Additionally, property tax loans. Right now, the competition in that space, they do a great job of helping people pay off their taxes and saving their homes, but they don't do a great job of putting them on a path to be able to get out of it, And so our product's a much longer amortization, so it's over 30 years, up to 30 years at least.
Yeah. So explain that, Matt. So that's people that are, somebody that's non-escrowed, I guess you would say, right? So, I mean, whether it's an investor or, I guess, even consumer, right, that's gotten behind on property taxes with this massive increase over the last couple of years.
Correct.
Is that kind of what they're basically creating, some kind of loan that catches that up to speed, and then you're amortizing that out over a long period of time, so it's affordable for them to be caught up. Is that correct?
That's exactly right, Tavis. And while our rates are obviously going to be higher, you're going to be paying less than you would in penalties and interest with the county.
So it doesn't necessarily help the new rate going forward. It just pays what they're behind on. Is that correct? Or
correct. It keeps them from getting foreclosed on, and that's typically the people that would want to use us is they don't have another option. And so they'll come to us, or perhaps it's like, wow, I was expecting to pay $8,000 this year in property taxes. It's 14. I don't have it. Well, it's going to save them money to get a loan through us than to go in default with the county. That's going to be more expensive with penalties and interest. So we would give them the loan, amortize it up to 30 years. There's no prepayment penalty. So whenever we're paid off, we're paid off. But we also escrow the taxes for them going forward, so they don't get in that bind again. And we also would keep up with what our expectations are of what taxes are going to be, so there's not the surprise bill at the end of the year that happens.
Sure. And I've seen this too, just with the different people I've talked to, and just kind of knowing, what happens, right, is the people, especially escrowed, right? There's an escrow shortage because the tax rate goes up. Like it has, especially in a new transaction. So somebody that closed on a property last year, and the county sees that update in sales, in the sales increase, and then they increase drastically for the new year. And then the escrow's got a shortage, right? So then the mortgage company, even if it is an escrowed fee, will then reevaluate what that monthly payment is. And we've seen in some cases, that payment might jump $500 a month. I've heard this, and maybe you could answer this, but that typically the county or the mortgage company is trying to recapture that deficit within 12 months. So not only is the new rate going up, but they're also trying to collect the deficit within 12 months. But I've heard that they could extend that up to 36 months, typically with the mortgage company. Is that something you've heard of?
Well, it depends on the product.
Okay.
But most mortgage companies have more flexibility than they offer off the bat. So, so if you have a mortgage company and you have an escrow shortage, then if you talk to them and you say, look, I can't afford this, I need a plan that's going to help me be able to afford it. A lot of times they will actually work with you and extend that out some. But, until we really get some serious reform, where it's a bigger problem is non-owner occupied. So your investors, because there's not really much of a cap on what they can do to you guys right now. There's been some new legislation that they're trying to tweak that, but I mean, we're still a ways off before they fix that problem. And so what's scary there's no limit to how much your taxes can go up as an investor. Fortunately, most of the counties haven't been abusing that, but they could. With an owner occupied, there's a ceiling on how much they can raise it. So it's rare on owner occupied that you see a tax jump that's unaffordable for more than a year, unless someone already bought too much house to begin with,
Yeah, for sure. Well, Matt, it's always fascinating when I talk to you because there's always so many different elements of knowledge that you bring in our industry, right? From all different facets. Obviously my primary focus is, investment real estate. And so we've had lots of conversations with that over the years, but also just even, the traditional side as well. And so, it's interesting because you have the title background, and I know just for my career starting out, I got licensed in 2004. And then in 2005 and 2006, I was doing, commercial type stuff. I represented an investor. We bought up about 38 lots from Beal Bank. So we were direct to Beal Bank. And then Beal Bank gave me some listings of theirs to sell. And I realized really quickly the importance of title, because we had some different title snafus that happened. In fact, one of the stories was Beal Bank gave me a property to sell. I sold it. We got it under contract. We go through title, and then there's a dispute because the HOA said it was their property, and the bank had been paying taxes and everything else on the property as long as they had owned it. But it was like a one of those quick transactions where there's probably several parcels of land going in at one time, and it was just literally like one got recorded before the next one kind of thing, and it was just something goofy with that. And so nevertheless, they ended up having to claim title insurance on it, and the deal couldn't go through. And it was one of my first times of seeing that and kind of realizing that it was a lot more than just somebody putting on a pretty smile and trying to get my business and take me to lunch and ink my deal. I was like, okay, well, yeah, there's some legitimate background here to title. And there was several other situations where I realized, the depth to title and the importance behind it. And so it was funny because, especially once I merged my business into KW in 2009, of course, there was a lot more exposure at that point to, luncheons and different title companies, and even crossing paths with you, and we were always friendly and talking, but I was like, no, I'm pretty locked in. Whoever I've got a title with, man, is, just because I'd been down the path where things blew up, and so most traditional real estate agents will never experience that, right? They'll never experience that kind of.
If you're not doing extreme volume, it's hard to appreciate the title business if you're not doing real volume. And the reason is because claims are rare. So the Texas model of title insurance is different than other states. Every state's a little different, but in Texas, we focus heavily on what's known as title assurance, which means that getting it right at closing. So loss prevention, claim prevention at the closing table, as opposed to risk insurance. Now, there's still the risk insurance component, but so we have title plants, all this really expensive process, title examiners, which are very, well paid, guys that really know what they're doing to make sure that when you close, you shouldn't have any problems. Now, that's not to say you won't, and if you were a guy like me, you'd think every closing had a problem, because I don't get calls to say, hey, I just wanted you to know that closing went well. No problem ever happened. I don't get those calls. It's always, hey, this is a problem. But where I got my business heavily in title was, one, I had the best closers in the business. We all say that, but it's true with me. Most of the girls are still in it, and they're legendary. Everybody knows who they are. But the other thing was, people knew me as the guy that could get a deal done. And so I would get referrals from other title companies that couldn't necessarily figure out how to close it. And there's some really creative strategies to navigating complex title problems, to where you can solve pretty much anything that comes up. There's only been maybe a couple of times where I'm like, that's just not insurable, or it's not reasonably insurable. There's just not enough money to justify insuring this deal.
Yeah.
But normally you can figure it out. And that's kind of what really kind of helped me launch my business. And now I have affiliations with multiple title companies, and so I help them out, give them, my thoughts whenever they run into a problem. I'm like, hey, this is how I would do it. Mm-hmm. And so get a lot more deals done that way. So usually there's an answer. I try to tell people don't give up too quickly, because it's easy to give up.
Well, I think my biggest challenges over the years, with just on the investment side, and just, onesie twosie kind of single family residence, has always been probate, right? Anything that's ever tied up in probate. My longest closing history ever was 2 years and 2.5 months of escrow. And we finally got it done. And it was beneficial to us. We actually took the risk and paid the seller's taxes, and we paid, I believe we even donated money to the attorney who representing the seller, and paid that just to get the deal done, because the market had increased. I think we originally contracted it in like 2011 or 2012 and closed it like 13 or 14. And obviously, remember how big the market jumped. So
appreciation there alone covered that out of pocket. Exactly.
Yeah. So we just kind of looked at it like, hey, we're going to spend this in marketing to get another deal. So if the deal flops, then we're out this money. It's worth keeping the deal engaged. But it was a mess. It was, one person that was dead after the next person that was dead after the next person that was dead. And, it's so on and so forth, going down the chain of title.
I've got an interesting one like that right now that I'm fixing for somebody, I think. So those are fun. They do take time, so you got to buy them right. But they are fun to navigate.
Yeah. Well, that's something, it's funny, in all these different podcasts, nobody ever really talks too much about like title and these kind of things that, that come up.
Right.
And obviously, you can make a lot of money on probate leads and estate deals, but, sometimes this is where it gets really hairy, and it's usually not fast. Anytime that I've ever gone into contracts with something and somebody says it's probate, especially the last couple of years in Dallas County. So we went into one, I was actually wholesaling. Well, I decided in January, I got the lead. It seemed like it was going to go a lot faster. Thought we were going to wholesale it. It gets stuck. I had to go through probate. I don't think we closed it till October. Wow. And at that time, the value had gone way up. And I'll even throw them out. But it was Kevin Brown being the end buyer. And so, of course, it came back around and the value went up like $65,000. And I'm like, Kevin, you want to give me a little bit more on this one?
Kevin said no, I bet.
Yeah, oh, yeah. No, he was like, what are you talking about? And of course, I was giving him a hard time, but he was like, what do you mean, man? I've been here the whole time. I'm like, well, I'll take you down if you don't want to do it. He's, no, I want it. So anyways, it's kind of, kind of funny, but all right. So, 2010, obviously at that time, we're coming out of the mortgage crisis. You're getting into title at that time. Things are ramping up. REO is big at the time. Short sale was starting. I think my very first short sale deal that I ever did was actually in 2005, and it wasn't really heard of at the time, but they did exist. But it was actually fairly easy to get that one done. And then, of course, then they gained a lot of popularity and things got crazier and crazier. People are talking about short sale again. You're starting to hear that term being used again in today's market.
Yeah.
I think the challenge with that, right, is most people have equity. They may be behind, but they've got equity in their property, right? Is that kind of what you're seeing today? And
Yeah.
what's your thoughts on the REO market coming back?
So I'll talk about a bigger issue that'll kind of answer that question. If you look at when we experienced the subprime collapse and all that fallout that took several years to get through, a lot of that mortgage debt was owned by mortgage-backed securities. So it was owned by the private sector. And so the private sector was saying, we will invest this much money for this kind of return on this type of product. And so if we were still valuing mortgage product the same way, so if it was primarily mortgage-backed securities and whatnot today, back in the mortgage market, interest rates would be between 11 and 12%. That's what they would be, just based on historical norms, how the markets are. That's where they should be. The difference is that currently the bulk of mortgages are backed by Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA, and VA, right? While Fannie and Freddie they're not exactly the government, they kind of are, because they're backed by the full faith and credit federal government. So they can always be, federalized or privatized or So I think a lot of the rates being lower is an artificial influence from pressure from the government. If you look at where we are in terms of defaults, those are relatively high. So we should be seeing more foreclosures and more short sales, but we're not really. And instead, we're seeing a lot more workouts, kind of like modifications. Mortgage companies are working with borrowers a lot more because they're not playing as much with house money. Some of it's house money, of course, but it's not just house money like it was back in the subprime collapse. Right. So in my opinion, short sales, they'll go up, but I don't think they're going to go up like people are expecting. One, because of what you said, equity, but two, because lenders are more incentivized to work with borrowers this go around. And plus, we're coming into an election year. They don't want to have a big mortgage crisis in an election year, which is also why I think we'll see a dip in rates 2024, at least temporarily, because otherwise, anybody could run and no way Joe Biden could win, So I think that short sales are coming, but we're a little premature, in my opinion.
Got it.
We have to see values drop first.
Yeah, and obviously, Dallas, overall, even through the mortgage crisis, when other parts of the country were dropping heavily, we never really saw a dip, right? You saw, the biggest issues were, people trying to sell their home that were 100% financed and didn't have the, money to cover the cost to sell, right? That was one of the biggest things we saw. You saw a little bit in some of the track home builders and the production builders. You saw a little bit of, situations there in our area, in some of the outlined areas. You saw some of that happen.
It was usually,
but overall,
it was usually stable. People doing 100% financing. That's usually what it was. I think during that entire time period, one of my assets only gained, I think, 0.3% in value one of those years. Everything else I had went up more than that.
Yep.
I didn't lose any money on anything. But then again, we didn't have this massive appreciation that we've been experiencing here in recent years either.
Right.
So if were it to happen today, I think we would see massive retraction in values and massive short sale losses and things, because we've had such a jump in values in the last few years that I don't think I've ever seen anything like it in Texas.
So Matt, let's talk a little bit about then you said 2020 when you sold out of title and
Yeah,
pulled away
2019
from that?
2020, I exited
Okay.
the title business.
Okay.
It's the title business is hard. You make a lot of revenue, but there's a lot of expenses. I ran a pretty high margin, so I was one of the more profitable operations. But to keep that going, you're constantly having to deal with the personalities.
Yeah.
You've got no other way to put it. You got a lot of high maintenance people you deal with, whether it's buyers, sellers, agents, lenders, closers. Everybody expects a lot out of you. And so it's a very time consuming from a management standpoint business.
Yeah.
And for the margins you're making as a business owner, it's just hard to justify to do it for very long, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, and it's a tremendous amount of volume, right? For
Yeah.
little return per transaction, right?
Yeah. I mean, I was doing, around 300 deals a month is what we were doing,
Yeah. Wow.
which is pretty good volume.
Yeah. So you get out of that. Obviously, COVID hits, transition in, and then all of a sudden, now you're dealing with, representing several different clients, with the, that are landlords, and
Yeah.
you've got tenants that are squatting. So I know that was you had a field day with that throughout the
We
last
did.
couple years, and
We did. Honestly, we'd only done a handful of evictions before 2020.
Yeah.
Because evictions were always designed and meant to be super simple. And so there was just no point in people hiring an attorney to do it unless it got appealed to county court at law. Well, as you know, all the shutdown orders and things like that, it kind of threw a wrench into everything. And then they had some pretty stiff penalties if you made a mistake as a landlord in evicting somebody. So we saw that as an opportunity and we jumped in that space. And I will tell you, we had no trouble kicking out deadbeats.
Yeah.
Now, if you had somebody that was truly impacted by COVID, I mean, nobody was going to kick them out anyway. First of all, they were getting
Right.
assistance, so the landlord's being made whole. People we were kicking out, and we did a lot of it, were people that instead of paying their rent were buying boats or whatever,
Right.
and they had plenty of money. A bunch of them found themselves not having a place to live, which they deserved it, because a lot of our clients were individuals. They, W-2 guys that have like 2 or 3 rentals and they're about to go bankrupt because their tenant's not paying the rent, So
and they're using it as a crutch, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
we had no qualms kicking them out on the street. We did a lot of it.
Yeah.
So,
that's awesome. Yeah, I know we've definitely talked about that several times. Some of the crazy stories and things, even here recently, things that have trickled on, that have extended out. I was very fortunate.
Ryan Jackson, I think, had one of the best ones. It is pretty funny.
Oh yeah.
I'll share that with you sometime.
Yeah, yeah. He actually keyed me in on that a little bit. So yeah, that's pretty funny. But we were very fortunate. We didn't have any mishaps through COVID on any of our rental properties. I think I've talked about this before, and you and I have talked about it. I think as a landlord, you just have to have very real conversations with your tenants, and it's a matter of understanding that everybody goes through life and things happen and different situations come up. But I think having that open relationship with your tenant where there's an expectation of what I put out is what I get back, and just having that clear communication with the tenant, like, hey, if you get into a problem, please reach out. This is what I expect. Rent's due on the 1st. It's late by the 3rd, or it's late by the 5th. This is what we expect. And I pretty much tell anybody in one of my 12 months is like, hey, you're standing in my retirement. Like the way I'm giving you this property is the way I expect it back. These are important to me. I want it to be like a home to you. And in fact, in my rules and regulations, the very bottom line is, treat this home as your home and enjoy it. Right. Enjoy your home, make it your home. And so, we were very fortunate that, I think everybody was able to maintain, jobs and pay their rent through that time. Obviously a lot of other people were not as fortunate. I know people, that were like my son at the time was in the service industry. Service industry shut down.
Yeah. No,
So obviously things like that happen, right? And you've got to kind of prepare. And, we've also talked about this before, as if you're going to get into investing and you're going to be a landlord, you got to make sure that you've got reserves. You got to make sure that you're running this as a business and as an operation and being prepared for things like that to happen, even though it's not something you want to do. But in the past, years ago, it wasn't related to any kind of situation. But, I had a tenant that lost their job, but they were great tenants and they had been there 3 years before. And, they were a double house income, but one of them had lost their job. And so, I made it work with them. I was like, hey, I want you to stay. What do we need to reduce the rent to just to keep you going? And basically drop the rent down to where, I was either break even or I was negative a couple $100 a month until they got a job again, and then we picked it back up. And it was just like, if you got to be creative, right? And I think that's one thing you do well as an attorney is it's, you're always very creative and you're thinking outside the box and coming up with a solution, right? Being a problem solver. I think at the end of the day, that's what you do really well. And I think in this space, in this world, whether you're a traditional real estate agent or you're an investor, you've got to be a problem solver, right?
I agree completely. And I would say that, one of the keys that most people don't think about when they're trying to solve a problem is the solution has to be performable. And, if it's not performable, what's the point in doing it? And I've had deals where I'm negotiating with someone for a client and, the other side's like, hey, we want, $10,000 a month or something. I'm like, well, then no deal. We'll just file bankruptcy because there's no need. My guy can't do $10,000. You want me to go to him and say, look, you can't eat for the next 6 months. You can't leave your house. You can't have electricity and all this stuff. And you're going to have to sell off a kidney or something because there's just no way. He doesn't make $10,000 a month. I'm like, let's be intelligent or just say that we don't want to do a deal. And, and I think if you approach it with a mindset, you got to do a deal that's performable, whether you're a landlord or, doing some other type of investment. Anytime you approach a problem like that, you're more likely to have an outcome that you're going to realize. Otherwise, you're just setting yourself up to have another failure. So that's the way we try to always approach problems, ones that are performing.
Well, leading into that, what are some of the biggest mistakes you're seeing, investors make today? Whether, they're wholesalers, they're fix and flip, they're, buy and hold guys. What are you seeing, what do you think some of the biggest mistakes are that you're seeing constantly over and over again?
Well, the biggest one is, it hasn't changed in a long time, and it's having horrible contracts. Some of the contracts I see, like anytime you see something that says standard purchase agreement and it's 2 pages long, like you got that online or something, or you got it from some guy you overpaid at a seminar, and it's a piece of junk. Like you should never use it. I mean, most of the guys I know are scared to have adequate contracts be executed by people. And so they they want to have it as small and abbreviated as they can. Well, that's fine as long as there's never a problem. But if there's never going to be a problem, you don't need a contract at all. Just do a handshake, right? The contract's there to protect you if something goes wrong. And if you have a very defective contract, there's not a lot I can do for you after the fact. There's just really not. So that's the number one problem that we see, and it's everywhere. Everybody does that, especially the new guys. The second one is more of a newer problem.
You're seeing that more in wholesale, or you're seeing it both, like fix and flip and wholesale?
Every bit of it, yeah.
Okay.
They just don't pay attention to their contracts, and then when something goes wrong, they come to us to hire us, and we're pretty limited sometimes. Yeah. Like I've seen contracts that do not have a specific performance clause for the buyer, and I'm like, well, you did this contract. Earnest money is your only thing you can go after, which is your money. There's no specific performance clause, so we can't force the seller to sell. And by the way, you said there's no attorney's fees if you win. So, like, I mean, you give me $1 billion and I can't make that any better. Like, I mean, you screwed it up when you contracted. And so that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about is they don't put enough thought into that aspect. And that's a big issue. And the other one that's really, it's a newer issue, but we're seeing a ton of it, is people that are doing, they're buying properties where there's a quote unquote tenant in the property that is going to have to be removed after closing. And the seller doesn't want to deal with it, right? I mean, if you're an investor, you've heard this before, and most of the time it's true, and it's not really that big of a deal getting them out. But there's a trend going on right now, and I'm not going to talk about it too much because I don't want to give anybody any ideas out there, but essentially the tenants claim that they were buying the property under an oral contract. Now, in my opinion, that there's really no way for them to win that kind of a lawsuit against you as the buyer. But they can create enough problems, even an attorney that doesn't really know what they're doing, create enough problems to where they can tie that property up for 1.5 years, 2 years or more. And so you're better off, in my opinion, having a conversation with that tenant, or at least making sure that somebody does, and, you know, maybe getting something from them saying that they're a tenant or what, you know, just so you can say, look, I was a bona fide purchaser. I spoke to this occupant, and because I spoke to them, they made it clear they were a tenant. I assumed I could kick them out after closing. They never once mentioned they were buying it. You want to be able to say that because it's going to help your case later. The other aspect there, though, is we can still get them out. You know, you just have to factor in that cost to get it to the finish line, is that there could be a cost there. So anytime you're buying a property that has an occupant, you want to offer substantially less if you can't have a conversation with that occupant. You know, I would offer substantially less.
If you can't speak to an occupant.
Right. If you can speak to
Otherwise, you want to try to otherwise, you want to try to talk to the occupant and see what the plan is, and get a feel if they have any plans to move out or they're wanting to stay, or
and you know, and typically, just so you get your guys know, title insurance does not cover typically rights of parties in possession. So that means if that occupant claims that they were buying the property and they file a suit saying that they're buying the property, title insurance may not cover that. So you may be stuck with your own, you know, defense bill. So you want to keep that in mind. Those are the two biggest things I'm seeing right now.
That's a good word. Yeah. I mean, I see that quite a bit, right? I mean, you know, because landlords, I mean, it's something I look at, right, in my own portfolio. At the 12-month rentals that I've got, you know, they've gone up, you know, significant in value, right, to what's owed on them. But, you know, if I sell it, you know, in the residential market, you know, to try to get, you know, retail value, which, you know, they're renovated, they should, if it wasn't tenant occupied. But otherwise, as tenant occupied, the rent rates are so much lower than what the value is.
That's right.
That, you know, it doesn't make sense to sell it with the tenant in there, right? Or if you have to sell it, you're going to end up getting a much lower offer that way. So I think some people are doing it just because they're ready to pull some equity out, and they've got a big chunk of equity sitting there.
Right.
And they want to do it. It just doesn't logically make a lot of sense to be locked in to whatever that rent rate is. You know, somebody wanting $400,000 for their house and the tenant's paying $2,000 a month. It just doesn't make sense.
No, you can't. You know? The math doesn't work on that. Yeah.
Especially leverage with a loan, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So, well, that's awesome, Matt. You know, I appreciate that. So you talked a little bit about kind of what you see, obviously, going into election year. And I know people are pulling you all the time, kind of getting your opinion on that. What are some of the good things going on right now? I mean, where do you see, like, if you're a brand new investor starting out, or even somebody that's seasoned, and we're starting to see a little bit of a shift in wholesale, right? We're getting them deep enough to where they make enough yield is starting to kind of fade off a little bit. And, so even in my business where, since 2019, my wholesale business has been pretty healthy. And the flip side, I've been able to cherry pick a little bit more. And now going into a new year, I'm going, hey, I'm going to have to flip more again, I'm starting to see that. Are you seeing some of those things? And what are some advice? Just people just getting into this business. What are you seeing out there? And the other thing, I guess, which part of your lending business, right? I'm starting to see that there's a lot of talk again about subject twos and buying notes. And, I'm seeing a lot of popularity of that growing, and even other agents I know that are starting to get offers now, that are,
definitely
set up as subject to kind of propositions.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I started the business. That is where the cheese is going to be for a while. And I want to touch on subject to just a little bit to kind of demystify it. I'm not going to go way in depth, but, one of the things that I hear a lot about people that don't understand it is that they believe that it's illegal, and it's not. It does violate the due on sale clause of the mortgage. Not a big deal, though, because when you violate the due on sale clause, the lender has a right to exercise that clause and call the note due. They don't have to. You also don't have a duty to inform the lender that you did it. You have no duty to inform them. So, for that reason, the risk of them calling it due is minimal, but it can happen. And one of my fears is that with rates going up like they have been, lenders may rethink their position on that item. I doubt it, but they might. So if they do and start calling them due, that's the big risk in that space, is you could be left, holding a bunch of product that you can't liquidate. I think that subject to stuff is going to get pretty good. I think that, with that, you can do wraps. If there's too much equity for the seller, you can do a wrap, which is where they add to the debt. I like the idea of it. I think it's a good move as long as everybody understands what they're getting into. If they don't, then it's a problem, because it is going to make it to where that seller most likely can't go out and get a new loan. I don't like doing it with FHA and VA. I have talked to both the VA as well as HUD. They're not currently pursuing people for doing it. But because FHA and VA are what's known as qualified assumable products, I think you should go through the qualification process to assume it rather than just do it. And it's because those two programs involve a government benefit. And so I think everybody would agree that, if like, let's say, Tavis, you wanted a house and you want an FHA loan, but you don't qualify for it for whatever reason. So you're like, hey, Matt, will you buy this home, get an FHA loan for me, and then I'll just take it over? Well, I think everybody would agree that something doesn't smell right there, and somebody might go to jail if they found out about it. Right?
Yeah.
So if you do it several years later with somebody you didn't know at the time of origination, it's a little different, but it ain't that much different. So I've always had concerns with FHA and VA. I think people are they're too aggressive when they do it on those.
Well, I know one of the big things with FHA is owner occupancy, right? So how does that work on, have you seen that on an assumable qualification? Are they requiring somebody to be an owner occupant at that point, or does it not matter?
I'm not an expert on it, but either FHA or VA or both, I can't remember, allows non-owner occupied. I can't remember which one, or it may be both.
I know VA does. And FHA, if you've lived in it, then you moved out, you can keep the FHA loan valid.
Right.
I know that. But I don't know, with the intent, right? Like if it's there and you can, but maybe, I would see that. If it's already operating as a loan and it's there and it's assumable, then, I don't know what those guidelines would be, but
Yeah. So the other thing that we're working on, I've got an uninsured product I can do now. I'm trying to get an insured product available. I've been negotiating with some underwriters on it. And that's where you can buy properties with a loan at the foreclosure sale. Because, currently you can only buy a loan at the foreclosure sale you can only buy at the foreclosure sale if you pay cash.
right.
So it's going to make it to where you can pay with part cash, part leverage. It will be a hard money product. I've been working with the hard money lenders that are our clients on it. And essentially what we've got is we've got the ability to show you what all we would be willing to lend on each particular property that's up for auction that day. So going into bid what it is you can bid, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then when you're successful, we have the mobile printing set up to where you sign the docs right there, notarized, gets e-recorded, and then the property's paid for. So that's the process of it. It does work. We've beta tested it, but we haven't done it at a live auction yet. It does work, and I think it could be a pretty valuable tool next year for newer investors to find a different way to buy property, being able to buy at the actual auction.
And when you're saying insured versus uninsured, you're talking title insurance. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. So right now, I don't have a solution to get a title policy on it. I will tell you that it's an outside the box kind of concept. And as you know from being in this business, most title companies don't like outside the box.
Yep.
Which is fine. But I am still talking to a few to see what we can figure out.
Awesome.
Because I know it's way more attractive if you can get title.
Well, and I know, and if you're buying from the auction, you should have, some things in place to run title searches on those properties that you're bidding on, right?
Yeah.
And we had George Roddy Jr. in here a couple of weeks ago. So
he's a good dude. I like him.
Yeah. And, he just talked a little bit about the volume they were doing back in the day with America's Home for Rent. But, that was one thing I learned from him. And he had a service set up that we could buy into when we were buying auction, and we could send him a list of properties, and they would run title searches and pay $25 a property or something along those lines, or whatever it was to actually get, at least a true title search done to see what kind of liens were outstanding on those properties before you buy them. Because I think that's probably one of the biggest mistakes. People do that and they have no idea what they're buying and what kind of liens are sitting there because they're buying it uninsured.
Yeah, if you don't know what you're doing buying at the foreclosure sale, it can be pretty bad. I've known people to buy a second lien thinking they were buying the whole thing, and find out they've got like a $250,000 loan ahead of them.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, and there's just nothing you can do about that. Like you're just dead. So those are bad. Buying at the property tax sale is dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. But yeah, I mean, if I can make it a little bit of a cleaner process for investors to buy at the foreclosure auctions, one, I think it'll increase what the banks get back on their foreclosures, which is good. Because I think people would end up paying more if they could get a loan at the sale. But again, it's a little bit of a complicated process to put together. But we're ready. I'd like to get it insured. I'd like to get an insured product for it.
So Matt, just to kind of wrap this up, let us know where we can find you, and kind of your top things that you're doing today. As far as I know, I've used you for you and your firm to help stack some of my protection entities for the different properties I own. I know you're there obviously for litigation. I know that obviously now doing the lending stuff and just a sound voice of reason and legal advice when it comes to the real estate space right now. Anything you want to add to that, or just kind of highlight here to wrap this up?
No, I mean, I think that's a pretty good summary. I love real estate, and and I'm more on the investor side. I always have been, just simply because I like to think, and I like to solve problems, and so I've always enjoyed it a lot more. But yeah, as far as reaching me goes, I'm pretty accessible. I always tell people I don't answer my phone if I don't know you. I mean, if I do know you, good chance I won't either, but I always call back. But yeah,
So leave a voicemail or text you.
Just text me. Yeah, text me,
Yeah.
And if it's, I will say this, one of my pet peeves
Say, hey, I listened to the Real Estate Heavyweight podcast, and I'm calling you or I'm texting you.
Yeah. Well, one of my pet peeves is like, I've got a quick 5-second question. If you got a quick 5-second question, just text me the question. Don't expect a call. If you need a call, it's because we have a discussion, which is fine. But either way, yeah. But
when you are an attorney, you do charge by the second and the minute.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. And I always
just so people know that.
I charge in 30-minute increments. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, no. But my number, I don't mind giving it out. It's the easiest way to get all of me. It's 972-342-8188. Or you can look me up on Facebook. I post on there occasionally, but so you can hit me up on there either way.
Matt Aycock, guys, Matt Aycock. So, Matt, it was a pleasure having you, man. Thanks so much for taking time out of your morning here. As we're getting into the Christmas holiday here coming up this coming week. So, thanks again for your time this morning and jumping in and just all of your knowledge and expertise that you put out this morning. So,
thanks.
We are the Real Estate's Heavyweight Podcast, and Ashton is not here today, but as always, you can always follow us on social media. We do have a YouTube page now as well. It's the Real Estate Heavyweights Podcast. So stay tuned. We're uploading our videos as we've been doing these podcasts, and you can find us on Spotify as well as Apple Podcasts and any other place that you want to listen to podcasts. And of course, on social media, I'm Tavis, like Travis with no R, Tavis Westbrook here, and you can find me on the different platforms, and Ashton Hines, the Dallas real estate guy as well. And again, thanks again to Matt Aycock. Till next time, you guys have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon.